Now, all right, everybody, welcome to the Countless Vlogcast, episode 47. My guest today, Christopher Wallace, author. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing great, Justin. Thanks for having me on.
So tell us a little about yourself.
As you said, my name's Christopher Russell. I was originally a mechanical and aerospace engineer, and what I do is I write epic fantasy with a science fiction twist. So I take the principles that I learned in my education, and I try to make hard magic systems out of them, either that they're directly related to the sciences or they're in some way influenced by them. And so my debut work, Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, in the Divinity's Twilight series, just released on June 2nd in ebook, and it'll be in stores on September 22nd. And
It's a cool cover.
I know this was done by, have you heard of Chris McGrath?
No, I have not.
Chris McGrath did the covers for Jim Butcher, and then he did Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn Era 2, the mass market paperbacks. And so he's a fantastic artist, did a great job. I fall in love with the cover every single time I see it. But what it does is it follows a group of military cadet protagonists that are dealing with a failure of their ancestors that triggers the story 700 years in the past. So we go from a world with basically medieval technology, they're moving towards crossbows and Renaissance era weaponry. And then we fast forward 700 years and you have very anachronistic elements to the setting. You have airships, you have electricity and thermal energy being produced by different means. You have Lyrium crystals, a magical resource that enables them to skip different points in our own technological development. And then so there's two sides to the magic system. One is MagTech, so that deals with everything involving Illyrium and what you can do on the technological side. And then you have what people are able to do themselves with Manair, which is a component in the blood. I'd say it's similar to Force Powers in Star Wars. Star Wars was a big inspiration. I think I read every book in the old extended universe before Disney declared that non-canon, but we could talk about that for an entire hour.
So when did you get into writing? When did you start writing, and what got you into writing in the first place? And then talk a little about more about your book after.
Okay. So my writing process, getting into writing started when I was very young. My mother was an English teacher. She taught sixth grade English, elementary, and then even high school level. So I started learning how to spell and write when I was 4 or 5. I got an early start. And I remember scrawling everything on the notepads, repeating. They tell you, you see the horror stories where it's like a Catholic school or something, and the nuns have you writing up on the board. It wasn't that bad, but I have my pad of paper where I practiced everything. So I went from there to, I didn't do a lot of writing, but I did a ton of reading. Have you ever heard of the Redwall series by Brian Jacques?
Yes.
So you have your anthropomorphic main characters, your mice, your shrews, your voles, and then on the other side you have your vermin, you have rats, you have stoats, cougars, various other things. But I just loved Brian Jacques' universes and what he did with taking these animals and sending them on adventures, and then there was always the fantastic feast when they finished, and there was a sumptuous detail. You could basically taste everything. And I just loved that. And eventually I moved into Lord of the Rings, and you have your gateway drugs for fantasy. Yeah. And you just move your way through. And when I was in high school, I combined that with my love of history, and I wrote basically like a third of a novel. I didn't finish because I got into sports, academics, other things, engineering, deciding what I was going to do for my life. And I tabled that. But First Legion was a historical fiction that essentially examined what might have happened if Julius Caesar hadn't been assassinated. So I took some creative liberties. I gave Brutus's family, who was one of the assassins, I gave his family more power than they'd actually had. And so when Caesar puts all the senators to death for conspiring against him, essentially a third of the Roman Empire secedes. And you can imagine the ramifications that would have on history from that point on.
Very cool, very cool. So when did you really find your writing niche for yourself?
That would have been college. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was finishing undergrad, mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of Virginia, I read a book called Shadows of the App, series Shadows of the App by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And so I don't know, he's not as well known as some of the other Tor imprints like the Cosmere with Sanderson or whoever else are their key moneymakers. But he does a great job of combining technological elements with his fantasy setting. And I thought to myself, well, I can do that too, that I can take a military background. My father was Army. He retired as a colonel in the US Army. And so I grew up as an Army brat, skipping all around the world, did the Germany tour, was all over Europe, never in the same school for more than 2 years at a
Did you
time.
find yourself like journaling, like on your travels, or like were you more like just like taking with the flow?
I just went with the flow.
Mm.
I I enjoyed everywhere we went, all the different, especially in Germany, getting to
Mm.
see the culture and experiencing something different than you have here in the States. That really broadened my horizons. Fabulous people. They didn't care that I couldn't speak German at the time, even though I was in German enrichment classes, and they would speak English to us. So able to understand each other and find out about their history and society. And so that's worked its way back into my writing. There's a lot of German influences with one of the civilizations in Divinity's Twilight. But
So,
I'd
oh,
say,
sorry.
oh, I was
Go ahead.
just going to say that those experiences reading that and deciding that I wanted to take all the stuff that I had learned
Mm.
and put it back into a book was the birthplace of Divinity's Twilight.
Okay, so that was a little about how you got into your genre a little bit. So,
Yes.
like, when did you really like discover you like you could like write into this and like keep growing in like your genre?
So I started Divinity's Twilight about 3 years ago. Right when I finished Shadows of the Apt, way back when, that was 7 years ago now, I wrote the first two chapters, and then I thought to myself, well, this is sort of work. You have to put
Mm.
effort into, you have to think about all these different things. And I'm doing engineering courses right now. So do I really want to spend my free time doing something that's pseudo work, even if I get enjoyment from it? So I tabled it for another 4 years. And then about 3 years ago, I'd always wanted to write a novel. I always wanted to finish this. And I just decided I'm going to do this author thing. I just
Mm.
said, I'm going to say yes. So I stopped procrastinating, moved on, finished the first book within probably 6 months. And I've written the two sequels in the subsequent 2 years. And those are in the beta reading stages. One I hope to release next year. And then I'm also working on a standalone in the same universe, but a different planet
Mm.
at the same time.
Mm.
So
So what was
very
like
ambitious.
what was like the feedback from the first couple of books you wrote from like the audience?
Alpha readers or audience, because Divinity's Twilight has only been out a month on ebook.
On
So
the
so
audience, yeah.
far, so far feedback is great. You
Mm.
can read about it on Goodreads or Amazon. We've been getting pretty much just straight 4 and 5 reviews.
Mm.
Haven't seen anything below that yet. But the main thing that people say about the work, and that I'm thrilled to hear, humbled to hear, is that the world building is probably its greatest strength. That the amount of detail
Mm.
that went into the technology, the 7 races that inhabit
Mm.
Lazaria, the world, the history, the backstory, the key points that bring people from the past into the present, that give context to the conflict. The 3 nations that are basically balanced against each other, that they've been feuding for 700 years with nobody really gaining an advantage. And then you have your class dynamics, your race dynamics, not as you might see in our world,
Mm.
but between physiological differences.
Mm.
The Hughes are giants with 4 arms, and they are extremely intelligent, they're curious, and they are at odds with the Sylph, who are their neighbors, red-skinned, more diminutive, more graceful and elegant, and focused on magic. And so they're at odds because of their belief systems. Also, just the difference in physiology.
Mm. So
Mhm.
you say some influences from like real world occurrences at all, or you just like subconsciously from that influences from like real world occurrences?
Well, if you look at fantasy across history, it's just taking elements or historical events and extrapolating on them, using them as influences. Have you read anything by Brandon Sanderson?
I've heard of him, but I've never ever read anything from him.
Well, in his seminal series, the Stormlight Archive, that is still being published right now, what he does is he takes that dynamic, and within a single country, he has light eyes and dark eyes. And so the light eyes are in charge and the dark eyes are basically second-class citizens. And he examines the dynamic in that regard, that it sort of opens people's minds, that you're able to shed some of the baggage that we would have with a political discussion in our world and examine it in a new context. And so I do that to a certain degree with my world. And then you also have, of course, war, poverty. You have differences in religious beliefs, zealots versus more neutral moderates versus agnostics. You have all the interplay. Of course, Divinity's Twilight, the title itself, implies that the mythology of this world is in decline, that the gods have vanished. So the story starts 700 years before you meet the main cast, but even before that, there was rumors that the gods had walked among mortals, that they had lived on this planet, and they've been vanished for some time. And so by the time you fast forward 700 years, it's basically ancient history, that you still have people clinging to worship of the creator, the being that made everything, and his 7 angelic veneer, which were essentially his lieutenants, the people that carried out his will, and their antithesis, which is the void or oblivion, the blackness, the nothingness from which life emerged. And so that's probably my favorite part of developing a fantasy series, is that you have all these elements in play, that you can create and pull and do whatever you want, that there's a lot of inventive ground that you can either pull from or innovate upon.
So when you're like writing this, do you think about the audience when you're writing this? Or you just thinking about like yourself when you're writing this? Like, what is like your process? Like, do you like plan more? You pantser? Do you like write out stuff? And then when you're like writing, do you think about the audience, like in terms of their feedback too? And in terms of their feedback to the audience, does the audience get what you're trying to convey?
So I'd say that, starting with the first question, I'd say it's like 90% me, 10% what I think the audience is going to enjoy. What I try to do is, depending on the different themes that I'm working with, I want to leave if it's not directly related to the story, I want to leave it open-ended. If there is a plot thread related to somebody's character development, and there's a character like this that near the middle of the story, and I leave elements of their character up to the reader to decide, that I want the reader to imagine it how they would view the character, that they're able to fill in a few of the gaps. Character development, of course, is very important to me, and I'm trying to tell a story, a journey through human growth, through overcoming trauma or stigma or problems that they've had throughout their life. But I also want people to be able to see themselves in each person, because I'd say that there's a part of me in every character as well, that I saw a part of myself in them. So I guess that talks to a bit of how I do character development. As far as plot goes, I'm definitely a pantser for Divinity's Twilight, that I have notes. I put notes on my cell phone. I have this notebook right here, and then I fill random scraps of paper with tons of writing. And then this is actually for a work in progress that I'm trying to be a little bit less of a pantser on, so I actually typed up notes. But essentially, I have all these notes floating around that I come up with them on the spur of the moment, and I just have to write them down somewhere, because I'd say about 3 months into Rebirth, the first book, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to keep all of this in my head, that there's a ton of balls being juggled, and I'm just going to lose them because I don't know how to juggle to begin with. So that's neither here nor there. So pantser, key plot points, and a lot of the excitement and adventure I get from writing is filling in the details, that seeing where the character is going to take me, that I let them breathe, I give them freedom. And like in the work in progress that is a standalone, I was working on that a day ago, and I had a character, the scene was supposed to play out very calmly, very orderly. And then the antagonistic character in the scene says something that the character isn't going to stand for. And I thought, well, he's normally a very stoic individual. Is he going to take this lying down? No, it's towards the person he cares about most in the world. He's going to get up off the ground and punch the guy out. So we have this very laid back, very religious character that normally keeps his emotions in check that suddenly loses it because that's what he would do.
So in terms of like branding and promoting yourself too, I know like a lot of like authors like that's like after in marketing, after you read writing and publishing is like more the fun part too. But what is like some of your methods of like branding and promoting yourself too? And do you self publish or do you have like a publisher?
So I'm through a mid-sized press.
Okay.
They're independent. They're not one of the big fives. It's called Morgan James Publishing. Their headquarters is in New York. The outlet near me, I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia, and the outlet near me is in Norfolk, Virginia. And so I'm able to commute in if I need to take care of some things, if there's something I can't handle through email or on the phone. But anyway, my advice, because I went through a querying process, I talked to editors, I talked to publishers. I didn't go so much into agents. I would be open to getting an agent because they can open some doors with you with bigger people later on. But with that, there is very strict guidelines that everybody wants a one sheet of paper, that you're not supposed to have any fluff. You're not supposed to do any of your normal creative writing. It's just give me the plot details, give me what value you have, your previous works, and then send it to me. And one of the things when I started off, I looked at Tor, and Tor has an open submissions. You can put everything that you wrote, your plot summary, your first 3 chapters, or 3 chapters or 10,000 words, whichever is shorter, into a manila envelope, and you can send it off to them. And in 6 months, you'll get a yes or a no, and it'll probably be some sort of form letter, especially in the latter case where you get a no. And so that was very intimidating. And I sought alternatives. Morgan James Publishing was one of those. They were the second or third institution that I looked at.
So
and
what
so
kept you going? Like what after rejection, what kept you going?
Well, Morgan James was actually the first person I submitted to, and I thought I'm going to check with this group. I'm going to go through. I ended up sitting down with the head honcho, doing a lunch meeting. I'm somewhat organized when it comes to approaching somebody, so I walked in with a binder for him with all the material in it, a binder for his assistant, an extra binder just in case there was a third person that happened to show up. And they liked my presentation. It took about 2 to 3 months to hash out the details, and then we had a deal to move forward with Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. And so the reason that I call them mid-sized press and that I'm closer to the self-published side is I still retain my intellectual property, that I didn't sign it over for them, that we have a contract for the production of the books while I still retain my rights. And so that's a pretty good system. That's the same thing you get in self-publishing, where you have the freedom to revamp things or to walk away. But I'd say that my advice is that there's to new authors starting out is that there's no shame in whatever direction that you choose to go, because there are lots of great works. I've read tons of amazing indie works. I'm part of the Indie Fantasy Addicts on Facebook. And I've met so many authors that are more skilled at their craft than I am, that are further along, that definitely deserve to be traditionally published. That there is a lot of stuff that could go on those shelves at a Barnes & Noble or a Books A Million that just doesn't. And so the key advice I have is to just keep pushing, that if you have an idea that you want to put down on paper that you're not satisfied having in your brain, that you want others to see it, go through, find a few alpha readers, some close friends, some people that enjoy your genre, find some beta readers, some strangers beyond that. And if all of them are giving you good feedback, definitely go ahead. That you have something that the world needs to see.
Yeah, that's great advice too. Because a lot of people like aren't really sure. They may have the process of like writing too. They may have their own process, but like that actually get the book out there too. Because everybody wants to be read and all that too, and like have that acknowledgement too. So that's great advice too. So what are some of your present goals too? And like what have you learned during this time? And what do you hope to learn going forward?
Well, I have learned a lot about virtual marketing during the coronavirus, because my original plan was I'm going to go to bookstores, I'm going to meet their customer relations managers, I'm going to put faces to names, and I'm just going to try to be charismatic, that I'm going to get out there, I'm going to give them copies of the book, I'm going to do whatever I can to make them remember who I am, to want to stock my book. And of course, that's fallen through, that Barnes & Noble's just reopening. I don't know what Books A Million or Waterstone or whatever you have in whatever country you're at, because there's a lot of different ones, and that's its own landscape. But I've done a lot more online stuff, BookBub, bookshop.org. There is Google Play. I know there's 1,800 different ebook services that are carrying Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. And wow. That was just an astounding number to me. There's, of course, Amazon is king right now. There's audiobook landscape. I'm exploring audiobook possibilities because that's a big percentage of the market now. There is just so many different hats that you have to wear and so many different things that you have to juggle, that if you are a self-published or an independent author, that you are not with one of the big fives and they're not running your marketing campaign, you have to be a businessman or woman. You have to be an entrepreneur. And so a lot of my stuff, I keep Excel spreadsheets. I do screenshots of real-time rankings, and I do graphs. This is all that engineering work coming back in. I do Facebook ads. I'm getting ready to do Amazon ads coming up. I'll be doing some promotions as we approach physical release in September. What else am I doing? Interviews. I'm coming on your fantastic show, having this wonderful discussion. All author. I recently did an all author cover of the month contest, and my cover won nationally for the month of June. So that's a great feather in its hat.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you, appreciate it. But of course, all the credit goes to Chris McGrath, my illustrator, and to all the fans that came out and voted. That they surprised me with their love of both my work and the cover, and I just can't thank them enough. But it's a lot of putting yourself out there. It's a lot of, I'd say I'm down to 30% writing and 70% marketing. That I have days where I write, and then for every day that I write, I have 2 that I market. That I just do Instagram, I do Twitter, Facebook, social media. There's a lot of putting yourself out there because there's market saturation. Like I said earlier, there's so many great books that is what the self-publishing and the Amazon ebook market has allowed, is that it's this great expansion. The things that wouldn't have gotten traditionally published are now able to reach readers. And so we have a lot more ideas, we have a lot more availability. There's just this, like I said, an explosion of growth in the fantasy genre and across the board.
So I was going to ask you how quarantine affected your creativity, but I can see it hasn't affected your creativity though. But what about the beginning though? Did you find like you were like stressed and like not writing as much and not marketing yourself to it? Or did you have like a plan like when you first like got into quarantine?
Well, the thing that it was advantageous to me was that I was just starting off. So quarantine starts in middle of March, and my ebook release was until June 2nd. So at the beginning of March, I had just finalized the interior formatting for Rebirth. We were just getting ready to get our first test copy sometime in early April. And so everything physically related to the book that needed to be done had just been finished. So that was when I started marketing. So I was forced to immediately adapt. I came into the coronavirus world. And so there was the like ambiguous, vague plans that I had going forward, that I was going to attend conferences, I was going to do conventions, I was going to get out and hit the streets, and those were immediately curtailed. I couldn't do those. So I had to hop into the social media, and in many ways, it forced me to establish this presence that is going to help me as I go forward. That's going to, just having all of this done, having my website in the state that it is going to benefit me later on.
So talk about the process a little bit of like you just said like publishing with a publisher. So what's like the time limit for like people out there like maybe not like know about it too, from like I guess from like submitting your project to like getting it like physical copy?
Okay, so this is a great discussion. So if you're self-published, the amount of time it takes you to do something is however long it takes you to get all your contractors in a line and getting it into one file. So your contractors would be your formatters. So the people that go in and make your book look great, that they do the fancy text, they do the cool scene breaks. It would be your map makers. If you have maps, I think every great fantasy should have a map, but that's just me personally. I'm from the Tolkien school of thought. And actually, go ahead and do another quick self plug on that. That my artists that came through and did it, they were also thinking Tolkien, and so they did something very
Wow.
similar to that.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And so your maps, your illustrator, your editor, you definitely want to have somebody take a look at it. If you're great at editing yourself, you may just want to have a proofreader, but you need somebody to come through it, and it's called the Chicago Manual of Style. They go through and check your colons, your semicolons, all those crazy grammar things that no one wants to think about. And then, so just getting those in line, that's what you need to do for self-publishing. If you want to go through a mid-sized press to a traditional press, let's say you go straight to submitting to the publisher. You go straight to submitting to the publisher like I did, and they have an acquisitions editor look over it. They have some sort of board or people, they all give a thumbs up, give A-OK. You're looking at somewhere between 6 to 9 months on average. And so the first 3 months are going to be the planning. The next 3 months are going to be getting all the material in. And then the last 3 months is going to be the marketing. And so then you have quick turnarounds like you can do with big publishers and big titles. I was mentioning Brandon Sanderson earlier, and I mention him a lot because people compare my work to him, and I love him. He's probably my favorite fantasy author. But he is about to release book 4 in his Stormlight archive, The Rhythm of War. And he literally just finished the last draft of it 2 days ago. And it is supposed to be out in November. So he has a 4-month turnaround. So if you are well known, if you are going to be a bestseller, if they already know that your book is going to do great, they can turn it around in less than that 6 to 9 months.
That's really great, though, just go deep, because a lot of time we don't want to talk about this, too. Not that people like afraid to talk about it, too, but it's just not like a big like discussion talking about like the business side of like books. And I think more people talk, like open to it, too, because I know you want to sell your book, you have to, like you said, put yourself out there, do all this like stuff, too. And it's like work, too. It's like your own business, too. So it's like your own baby, too. So if you really want to like push it, then it's like up to you, you know? So that's really great. So
I'm not sure if this applies in fantasy and science fiction, but one of the things that my publisher told me when I went to him, this is the head honcho, he said that 90% of book sales is you selling yourself. That if people have confidence in you, your message, whatever product you're pushing, they're going to buy your book. And he said 10% is what's actually in the book. I'd say with entertainment, which is your fiction side, your fantasy, your science fiction, your mysteries, your thrillers, that it's probably somewhere more 50-50. But once you're into the system, once somebody's bought your book and they like you and they like your content, then they're going to keep buying. And that's where you've probably had with more experienced authors where your back catalog comes into play, where if they like your newest book, they're going to go and check out everything you've done before. And so that's what I'm focusing on building up now. That's my next goal, releasing the sequels to Divinity's Twilight, and then also releasing standalone. So if people don't want to get into a series before it's finished, they can also try out your work through basically an easier entry point.
Great, that's great. So 3-part question. Who's your audience? What do you want to expand in your audience, and how do you reach your audience? You said, I know you talked a little bit about that too, but in terms of like, just talk about like more detailed, like way you like use social media.
All right, so my audience, I would describe them as epic fantasy fans, people that like Patrick Rothfuss, George R. R. Martin, Robert Jordan, people that have written great epics. And my goal is to do something similar, but I'm doing it with more of a steampunk World War I, World War II aesthetic, where, yes, there are people running around with swords and pikes and glaives and what other obscure weapons, and also using magic, whether it's elemental, whether it's magnetism, whether it's singing, being able to manipulate people's thoughts with your voice. My magic system has hard rules for how you can use it, but the applications are extremely varied. So it goes from hard to soft, if you've heard those terms. But my goal is to write a great military epic that you're going to have, you have people in uniform on the cover, they're Napoleonic. that you have these great airship fleets in the present that are going to control the pace of combat, that are going to allow countries to exert pressure on their neighbors. And so you're also going to have a political and an economic and a sociological conflict, that you're going to have all these things wrapped up. And I also mentioned religious conflict, because all of these are tied back into each other. So you can think of it as, I'd say that it's epic fantasy in that regard. It's military fantasy, it's flintlock fantasy, there's muskets and rifles, and it's also steampunk fantasy. There's not so much steam because Illyrium burns cleanly, and I could get into all the engineering aspects of that. But that's one of the cool things, is that you don't have the pollution in this world, because even though people are fighting these great battles, their airships are hovering along because of an energy source that is renewable, that constantly sucks in ambient energy, multiplies it, and gives it back. But that's where I start to go down the rabbit hole of world building, and we don't want to do all that right now.
Yeah, we can do another time. Part 2, we can do that too. So
what was the second part of that?
It was what do you want to, you talked about, you want to expand to, how do you reach your audience though? I know you use Facebook, Instagram, and like other like sources, but like what is like your like plan in terms of like people that don't know, because like social media could be like broad, so it's like, how do you break, if you could break it down for the people?
So the thing that's been the most useful for me, and I'll talk about this from a business perspective, is Facebook ads. And what Facebook ads allow you to do is you're able to go out and find those core groups that you think are going to jive with your work. So like I mentioned, Patrick Rothfuss, Brandon Sanderson, Stormlight Archive, Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, all those different things that are either going, that some element of my work echoes. So Lord of the Rings, I have the high fantasy races, except for I put a twist on all of them. All 7 of them have something new and unique about that. And I want people to jump in and figure out what those are and how they're going to relate to the plot of the world. From Sanderson, we have the epic scale, we have the magic system being involved with the plot, we have the political elements. From the Wheel of Time, we have the detail. I've had people say that my prose is some combination of Jordan and Sanderson, that I do great descriptions, and then I also have great action. And so I'm very humbled to get those praise, to be compared to those greats. And so being able to fall somewhere in between them is something that I think a lot of people will like. And just taking all these different things, because everything, what we do with ideas as writers is we put new twists on them, that we take what's old and we breathe new life into it. And so I think that I have some original ideas, but that's because my experience is limited. The amount of work that you can consume, the amount of literature is limited, especially when you start writing your own. So somebody might come along and say, oh, well, that's like this that was in a previous work. And I may not even know that I'm paying homage to it, that it's something similar, but that everything builds on what came before. And so my goal is to just write something great that I love and that I think the readers are going to love. And so the different groups that I'm pushing this out to are ones that I think the work is going to take what they already know and is going to do something fresh with it, that is going to push it a little further, whether it's in book 1 where I've done all the setups, or later on in the series.
Great. So you got a lot of like great qualities. What would you say makes you most unique? A lot of authors that ask this question are really humble about this, but like this braggadocious as possible.
All right, so let's brag as modestly as possible. That's the goal, right?
Yes.
Well, trying to be a little bit funny. So I would say that the elements that most unique is the interplay of magic and technology in my world. That you have these ancient spells that are almost like nukes, and they come back into play at some point in my book, that they've been banned. And yet at the same time, you have the new interplay of magic and technology, where you have Ingimages, which engineer plus mage. That you have Ingimages coming up with these fantastic airships. You have Panscraft that are coursing across the land. You have amazing fortifications with energy shields that are projected by magic. I call them looms. You have amazing stadiums filled with hovering TVs where people, it's like the Colosseums of ancient Rome, where you're able to watch sporting events, special sports that I've come up with, one of which is called Flag Brawl. and it's essentially a very violent form of capture the flag with football, American football-like rules. I have to clarify.
Have you heard of
No,
this sport, Counter Rico? It's in Florence. It's called Counter Rico. It's like a combination of like football, boxing, and like soccer, I think.
oh, that sounds
Just look it up. Yeah, look
fascinating.
it up. It's
I will.
pretty awesome.
But no, so what I consider unique about my world is the way that these two come together, that there are, whether physics, thermodynamics, chemistry, that there is some explanation that is going to resonate with a real world reader for why the magic works, for why the technology works. And the unique thing about my world is the development, that there has been a progression to get here, and that you can follow that back through the history, or even back through the cultural and sociological changes of each of the races or nations, how they got from point A to point B through technology. That there is a constant back and forth between how we develop as a culture and how our tech develops.
Mm. So just give us a little snippet of what's next for you in terms of upcoming project. You know, talk about a little bit in the beginning, just to give everybody a refresher of what you're working on next.
So Untitled Book 2, that's out to beta readers right now, planning to release, I'd say third or fourth quarter 2021. So that's your late summer, fall, similar to like we've done this year. And so you don't have to wait terribly long. There's no 6 to 7 year gap between books in this series. My goal is to have one out every year. And at the same time, I'm trying to do an Asian fantasy work in progress that is going to take elements of Chinese and Japanese culture, focusing on Japanese feudalism and the Han Chinese court from, I believe, its later period, like 180 AD to 200 AD. I don't know how familiar you are with
Somewhat, yeah.
Yes, the consequences and the chaos preceding the Three Kingdoms period of China. So I'm also a video gamer. I love Total War games. Have you heard of those?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so my goal with this is to take those different elements, and so you're going to have your rigid class system, and then drop it into a world with a very harsh climate. So seeing how those interplay, and then I'm going to assign a hard magic system based on a facet of my mechanical engineering background to people in this world. And so how does that hard magic system balance with the other three? So those are the three pillars of this new world. And it's going to be a standalone, a single entry, one comprehensive story.
Great. So I'd like to end with like a positive message from you to the audience out there, and you'd like to share to your readers and the world out there.
To my readers and fans, just thank you so much. All the reviews that you do, all the feedback that you've given me, purchasing the book, telling a friend, giving recommendations, that all of it enables me to do what I do, that I'm able to be an author because of your support, that that's just across the board, that no author would be where they are without the people that support them, that come through and read their works, and that continue to push them on to greater heights. To everybody else, to other authors, to other writers, you're doing great. Your work continues to make a difference, that especially in these troubled times with coronavirus, with everything that's going on in the world, that entertainment, that themes, that great messages with characters that are strong, or even characters that are weak, that are overcoming their trials and tribulations, that are trying to become the best versions of themselves, that are going through the same circumstances we are now, that they're all necessary, that these are the stories that people are going to read decades from now, and that they're going to use to frame who we are. That if you look at classic literature, that we're still finding out new things about people that are decades or centuries or even millennia old, just because of the stories that they tell. So we'll see what people look at when they look at the fiction of 2020, the fantasy and the science fiction and everything else, and we'll see what they say about us. So keep smiling, keep writing.
I appreciate that. So what are your tags so people can find you and follow you, support?
Tags, main one is ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. So that's just my name, add author, and you're going to be able to find free reads, jumping off points into my Divinity's Twilight universe, and then a preview of the prologue from Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. You also have my Facebook, which is Divinity's Twilight Fantasy Novels. There are several groups that you can get into and interact with the content on there. My Instagram is Christopher_Russell_author. So the same as the email, just put underscores in between the words. And I put up a lot of new concept art for the world and character focus. And I use that in Facebook as my main places to put news and upcoming promotions. And then my Twitter is pretty complicated, but you'll be able to find a link to that from my website.
Okay, great. So thank you for coming on, Chris, sharing your books. It was great. And thank you everybody for watching. This has been the
No
Countless
problem. Thank
Podcast
you for having me on, Justin.
episode 47. Going to guess Chris Russell. Thank you, Chris, for coming on.